Looks like we're live. Hello, everyone. This is Boomer Life Lessons and Stories, and I'm Ron. I hope this video finds everybody doing well and being safe and careful out there, given what's going on in the environment today. You are always on my mind, and I do nothing but wish for good things to happen to you and for you and your family as well. We're going to talk a little bit about mentors there, mentors here, mentors everywhere. You'll find them in the most unexpected places. But before we go there, please like, share, and subscribe this YouTube video and this YouTube channel, I should say. It would greatly help us overcome the difficulties with the YouTube algorithm and allow us to hopefully rise up into the list where everybody does their search so that we can actually reach more people and perhaps share a little happiness and positive outlook with them. I know that we have difficult times, but one of the things that I am really finding out, and my wife and I both are finding out, is we're going through a pretty good trial run for retirement. And what I mean is when I finally fully decide to retire, we'll be around each other more and more and more. Well, today's environment with the virus that's out there, I'm around her more than I have ever been actually during the day in my entire working life, right? And that's a good thing. We're doing well with that. She has her office, I have my office, and then we collaborate on our projects, and everything is good. And we have a big laugh about it because I think about my mom and dad. My father was a truck driver, and my mother got used to him being gone 3 or 4 days at a time, and then he'd come back in and, of course, be with the family when he wasn't on the road. And we used to tease her about what's she going to do when my father retires, and they're together all the time. But I'm sure that that would have worked out well in any case because it's working out well for us. So I hope it's working out well for you, whatever your situation is, whatever you're doing. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with today's topic: mentors, where to find them. Being in the business that I was in for so very long, I had the privilege, and actually I was exposed to many mentors, and most of them were what I would call informal mentors. And the only reason why I say they were informal is because they weren't assigned through management. They were assigned they were not assigned to me at all. They just happened to be there for me, it seemed, when I needed them the most. And I don't know what it is about a mentor. They have this special attribute where they can tell if somebody's troubled. They can tell if somebody needs a little help. They can tell if somebody needs a kind word or a pat on the back. Mentors are special people. But you don't have to wait until you're in that dream job of yours to find mentors. They're in your personal life, and they are actually, if you think about it, you had mentors in your past even as teenagers, right? And I did. It was interesting that I worked at a grocery store in Little Rock, Arkansas, when I was in high school. And the grocery store, the chain, was called Weingardens. And some of you may be familiar with Weingardens. I think Weingardens transitioned more from grocery stores to like real estate at some point. I think they were out of Houston. But when I wasn't playing sports, and I played baseball and football, I was working in that part-time job, earning a little extra money, as kids would like to do, to, buy things or go out on dates or things of that nature. And so I started work at Weingardens, and I was there for a pretty long time, as part-time jobs go for kids, for teenagers. I was there for 2 or 3 years. And I got to know our manager of the store very well. His name was Mr. Hawthorne, and then another gentleman took over from him, Mr. Grady, and they both ran that store, and they ran it as professionals. But you know something else that they did? In particularly Mr. Hawthorne, they got involved with their employees. They got to know their employees. And it was important to me as somebody that, when I started out first there, I'd never really had a formal job where I was there every week and so many days a week. Now, I did start working as a 12-year-old. I'd go out to the lumberyard with my dad before he'd go out on trips, and we would help load his truck, and we unloaded boxcars. And it was kind of interesting. It was a different time. 12, 13-year-olds, the owner of the lumberyard got to the point where rather than call Manpower, which was the local temporary help contracting business, he would let my dad know that, hey, if the boys want any more work, we can have them unload this boxcar and we'll pay them. And they paid us pretty good to do that work. And it got to the point where the owner of the lumberyard liked us doing it versus the contract help from the Manpower, simply because we got it done really quick, right? And we made decent money. So it wasn't my first job technically, but working at Weingarten's was the first kind of permanent job I had where I was expected to be there on a certain type of schedule and calendar time during the week. So one day I was working on something that was important to the grocery store, and I wasn't really engaging with the customers. I was focused on this certain aspect behind the scenes type work that goes on a grocery store. And to be quite honest with you, I don't even remember exactly what it was, but I do know that Mr. Hawthorne came back to check on me to make sure everything was going well. And he and I got into a conversation. I kind of got into a rhythm of what it was that was needed to be done. And I was working very focused on it to make sure that I got it done quickly and so forth. So he comes back and we have this conversation. And he said, Ron, don't worry if you make a mistake in any job. I mean, people make mistakes. That's okay. What's important is that we learn from our mistakes so that we can do better going forward. And I thought that was pretty good advice. But then he said something else. He said, but if you make the same mistake twice, that's a maybe. And what he was saying to me is that's a little question that pops up in people's mind. What's going on here? You made that mistake the first time. Didn't you learn from it? If you make the second mistake a second time, that's a maybe. Things happen and people get forgetful and lots of reasons, but that's a maybe. You make the same mistake a second time. And he and I had a pretty good conversation about that. And I said, well, is the other shoe going to drop? Is there something else you'd like to add to that? And he said, yes. As a matter of fact, the first time, that's okay. A mistake, everybody makes it as long as we learn from it. The second time, that's a maybe. And then he said, but do you know, if you make that same mistake a third time, it's no longer a mistake. It's a bad habit, and we're going to have to fix it. And you think about that. Think about your own life. You think about those things that you've done very, very well and your successes. And then you think about those sorts of things that maybe perhaps you didn't do well because of some mistakes that you made. And if you stop back and try to bubble up at the 50,000 foot level and have a kind of an out-of-body experience and look objectively at yourself, what you find is that there is a pattern, perhaps, to your mistakes. And at the root of the pattern is something that you do over and over and over again that causes you to make the mistakes. And until you fix the root cause, you're never going to do anything but band-aid the problem. And we all know band-aids get torn off, don't they? And that's, again, kind of part of another lesson I learned at working at Martin Marietta, one of the great companies that was a predecessor to Lockheed Martin. What we know is that if we go to solve a problem, but we only fix the symptoms, right? And we never solve the problem's going to be recurrent. It's going to be kind of like that game that you play at the fair, the state fair. It's called whack-a-moe. You hammer down over here, and the problem goes away over here. but it pops up over here. And you go and hammer down on that problem over there, but it looks like it's gone, but then it pops up over here. So you're playing this game of whack-a-moe. Why? Why are you playing that game? It's a waste of time. You're dealing with symptoms of the root cause. You're not dealing with the real problem. You're not dealing with the bad habit, whatever that might be. So what we try to do in problem solving is identify and separate what are the symptoms versus what's the root cause. And if we can identify the root cause, you know, that's 80% of the solution. If you can identify the root cause, then you know what will need to be done to fix the problem, because the problem erupts from the root cause. Your bad habits erupt from that root cause. So what Mr. Hawthorne was trying to tell me was that we're all human beings. There's no such thing as a perfect person. We all make mistakes, and that's okay as long as we learn from them. But if you make that same mistake a second time, that's a maybe. But if you make that same mistake a third time, then there's a problem. That's not acceptable. We're going to have to fix that bad habit. So identifying the root cause, what is at the source of the bad habit that keeps erupting and preventing you from being all that you can be, that's what we need to focus on. And if we can identify the root cause, create a plan to fix the problem, and then execute the plan and actually fix the problem and not a Band-Aid, then you're going to be better at your job than you were before. And you're going to be more of what you want to be and less of what you do not want to be. I've actually seen medical doctors. The parents will be concerned. Their child has a fever, and we've got to get that fever down. But the doctor's not so worried about the fever. They're going to treat the fever, but the fever is a symptom. The fever says the body is dealing with an infection. We have to identify what the root cause is and nip the bud of the infection so that we can deal with the fever, right? So what we do as engineers and scientists and individuals go into our everyday work life and trying to do the best we can, whether we're electricians or plumbers or ditch diggers or whatever, we want to be the best we can. We want to learn from our mistakes, and we don't want our mistakes to become bad habits. We want to be able to learn from our mistakes, not let them happen a second time, and certainly not a third time, because then the mistakes are rooted into our autopilot system. Yes, we have an autopilot system. We do things that we don't even think about because it's just part of our nature. And once they get ingrained into our autopilot system, they're harder to identify, and they're even harder to recognize. So the thing that Mr. Hawthorne was trying to tell me as a 16-year-old and a 15, 16, 17-year-old was that to be the best you can at any job you take on, you want to make sure that you recognize the problems and you prevent them and you learn from them, and you don't allow them to become habits that ingrain and root themselves into our autopilot system where we have blind spots. Now, I'll finish with this comment about the blind spots. The worst thing that can happen to you is that you have a bad habit and you have a blind spot that covers up your recognition of that bad habit. And then when that does occur, you're at the good graces of those around you that would be willing enough and have strength of character enough to confront you and say, look, you have a bad habit that needs to be fixed. I'm not sure you're aware of it. But when you do this other thing happens, which is not good for the team, not good for the family, not good for your career. As a matter of fact, I may have shared with you in a previous episode, I don't think I have, but I had an individual who became a very dear friend. It was an engineer that worked for me. And he actually had never worked for me up until he was assigned to come and work for me on a particular project. And I was glad to have him because I knew of him. I knew his reputation. He was a quality individual. But after he had been working for me for 3 or 4 months, he came up to me one day and he says, "Hey, Ron, you're all right." And I kind of laughed. I said, "Wow, where did that come from?" He says, "Well, you've got a reputation for being," and I'm quoting, okay? I don't normally talk like this, but he says, "You have a reputation out there in some areas that you're a hard ass." And I said, "Wow, where did that come from?" He says, "Well, I know where it come from. I can share that with you. People don't understand why you say the things you do, but I do now after having worked with you, and it's great fun working with you." He said, "You're very regimented. You're very regimented. You know how to get the job done. You know what's required, and you want to make sure that everybody follows company policy and procedure so that we do well for our project or for the company." And I said, "Well, I had a blind spot. I didn't realize that some people saw me that way." He goes, "It's okay. I'll share my understanding of you with them." I got to thinking about that. Was it a bad habit that I had? Was I not being sensitive to other people's feelings when I would talk to them about what they were doing and what they weren't doing and what they should be doing? But I tried to become more aware as I communicated about how I communicated with people. That's a very important lesson to learn. Not to come across as somebody that's a know-it-all, not to come across as somebody that is very regimented and there's only one way, his way. No, you want to come across as somebody, especially if you're in a position of authority managing a team, you want to come across as an enabler for the team, as somebody willing to go to combat for the team, to knock down barriers so that the team can become successful. And I was so very, very thankful of this engineer. I'm not going to call him off by name, but later on, as I said, we became very good friends. I went out on his deep sea fishing boat, and we had great time, and it was just very good. But he felt that I needed to hear the message. So perhaps there's another thing that we can learn from this. Suppose you don't have the blind spot or the bad habit. Suppose you see somebody else who does and perhaps is not aware of it. Would you have the strength of character to approach them for the good of the team, the good of the company, or the good of the family, to say, "Look, I know you're trying to do what's right for the family. I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to do what's right for the project. But do you know that this is one of the consequences of how you're approaching your job and how you're approaching people?" Would you have the character, the strength of character to do that? I hope you do. And if you do, I hope you do it in a very non-condescending way, a very supportive and nurturing way, a way that these individuals would know that you care about them as colleagues, as friends, as family members. And if you do that, the world's going to be a better place. I was better off from that conversation with Mr. Hawthorne all those so many years ago, when he told me about, if you make a mistake, well, that's okay. Everybody makes mistakes. You're only human. But if you make the same mistake twice, that's a maybe, you know. But certainly, if you make that same mistake a third time, it's no longer a mistake. It's a bad habit, and we are going to have to fix that, right? We do it together. We grow together. We benefit together. And it's not just me by myself, because I'm engaged with other people. And what makes this world go round are the relationships that we create and the friendships that we have. And together we can make it a better world. And with that, my friend, I think I'm done. You are always on my mind. I want you to know that, seriously. I want to make sure that all of you are aware that there's good things coming. And if I have it my way, they'd happen in an instant. But sometimes we have to make them happen by embracing and taking responsibility. Take care and all the best.